Liora Hale walked into the courtroom smiling, but that smile disappeared the moment her parents opened their mouths. Marta Hale never imagined the daughter she raised would become the reason she feared for her life. Rey Hale thought he understood his daughter until her darkest secret unfolded under courtroom lights. Jasper Redd was only a name on a screen, yet his influence would help twist Liora Hale's life beyond recognition. Liora Hale believed her family would stand beside her, but she was wrong in a way she never saw coming. When Liora Hale entered the courthouse, she expected sympathy. What she got was the final betrayal she created herself. Liora Hale's smile said she wasn't afraid. Her parents' testimony proved she should have been. Rey and Marta Hale walked into court seeking justice, not forgiveness, and their daughter had no idea. Liora Hale thought she controlled the story, until the truth her family revealed crushed her illusions. Jasper Redd vanished without a trace, but the damage he left behind followed Liora Hale all the way to court.
17-year-old Liora Mendez lived in a quiet Indiana neighborhood where people rarely locked their doors and everyone believed they understood the families around them. From the outside, her life appeared steady and predictable. She participated in school events, completed her homework on time, and kept a calm, almost distant smile that made adults assume she was simply shy. But inside her mind, a slow and unsettled shift was forming, one she kept hidden behind routine behaviors and polite gestures. Liora had grown tired of feeling invisible. She watched other teenagers online gaining attention, admiration, and validation from strangers, and she wondered why her own life didn't look that exciting. Every curated post she saw made her feel smaller, like her existence was too quiet to matter. When she compared her life to the glowing screen she stared at each night, she felt trapped in a place that couldn't offer her the thrill she wanted. The more she scrolled, the more she resented the predictability of her home. Her parents, Marta and Rey Mendez, tried their best to keep their household functioning smoothly, but Liora saw their guidance as control. Curfews felt like cages, rules felt like chains. The lack of attention felt like a constant reminder that she blended into the background of her own family. She believed her younger cousins received more praise than she ever had, and her parents' reminders to focus on school sounded like criticisms instead of encouragement. This growing frustration pushed Liora further into the digital world, where she met people who offered her what she believed she lacked: interest, curiosity, and validation. Among them was Jasper Redd, a boy whose personality contrasted sharply with her own. He embraced chaos, made dark jokes, and appeared to live without caring about consequences. His rebellious energy felt like a spark in the dullness of her life. Liora found herself absorbing his views like a sponge, especially when he encouraged her to ignore the expectations placed on her. Every complaint she shared about her parents' rules or her life's monotony was met with messages that deepened her resentment. Jasper presented rebellion as freedom and secrecy as empowerment. Liora, desperate to feel something different, clung to every word. Over time, she began expressing her emotions in ways she had never dared before. Late at night, she filled pages of a journal with fragmented thoughts about control, independence, and the pressure she felt in her home. What started as emotional venting turned into something darker as she wrote increasingly detailed reflections about what her life might look like without her parents' influence. She didn't consider these entries plans at first. She saw them as fantasies of escape, unaware that her mind was slowly crossing boundaries she once believed she would never approach. As weeks passed, her behavior changed. The once compliant, quiet teenager transformed into someone tense, withdrawn, and easily irritated. She avoided family meals, spent hours locked in her room, and jumped at small noises as if constantly on edge. Marta believed her daughter was overwhelmed with school or navigating normal teenage emotions. Rey assumed she needed space and tried not to pressure her. Neither realized how far she had drifted from them emotionally. The final shift came without warning. One rainy Thursday night, clouds hung low over the neighborhood and thunder rumbled in the distance. Inside the Mendez home, the ordinary evening routine played out, but Liora's mind was spiraling. Something inside her snapped, a collision of stress, resentment, and the belief that she had been pushed into a life she no longer wanted. What happened next changed the Mendez family forever. A violent struggle erupted in the quiet home, leaving Marta and Rey severely injured and fighting for their lives. When officers arrived, they found no intruder, no forced entry, and no sign of outside involvement. Instead, their daughter sat motionless on the back porch, her clothing stained, her eyes distant, as if she were observing her own life from far away. The community would soon learn that the smiling, soft-spoken girl they believed they understood had carried a breaking point no one saw coming.
Liora entered the courtroom wearing a neatly pressed outfit provided by the detention center, and she carried herself with a calmness that unsettled many of the people watching. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, her shoulders were straight, and her expression was almost serene. She glanced toward her parents, expecting them to meet her eyes with the familiar softness she had grown up with. Instead, Marta and Rey sat stiffly, their faces unreadable. Liora interpreted their distance as confusion or fear on their part, never imagining the deeper truth behind their silence. The prosecution opened with a clear, methodical explanation of the case. They wanted to establish that the events were not impulsive or emotional, but the result of a disturbing progression that began months earlier. The prosecutor placed photographs on the screen, images of the home, the objects involved, and the injuries Marta and Rey had sustained. Each picture stood as a quiet accusation, cold and clinical, stripping the story of any mystery. Liora watched without visible concern, convinced these details wouldn't matter once her parents supported her. She believed they would explain everything away, tell the judge she was overwhelmed, and insist she needed guidance rather than punishment. She held tight to that belief, leaning on it like a foundation that couldn't crack. But as the prosecutor continued, the evidence became more personal. Investigators found Liora's secret journal beneath her mattress, filled with pages of ideas she had never meant to share. They displayed her sketches, lists, and reflections, proof that her thoughts had not been fleeting or emotional outbursts, but calculated steps shaped over time. These pages revealed moments where she analyzed vulnerabilities in the house and considered how to create situations where she would have the upper hand. Her attorney attempted to show she had been manipulated by Jasper Redd and that her emotions had spiraled out of control. While Jasper's influence was undeniable, the prosecution countered with a timeline showing how Liora's actions intensified long after her conversations with him tapered off. They emphasized that the final choices were hers alone. Digital forensics experts presented logs from Liora's phone. Every deleted message was recovered, every search history restored. The courtroom heard how she researched topics that suggested deep contemplation rather than impulsiveness. She looked up methods, consequences, recovery times, and legal outcomes, leaving behind a digital trail that contradicted any argument of confusion. Social workers then testified about the parents' recovery. They explained how Marta struggled with everyday tasks due to nerve damage and how Rey's mobility had changed permanently. Their emotional state was mentioned only briefly, but the weight of it echoed across the room. The jury listened carefully, observing how trauma had reshaped an entire household. Liora's confidence wavered for only a moment when the prosecutors revealed a new piece of evidence, a sequence of timestamps that aligned her journal entries with search histories and moments in the home when she tested movements late at night. The precision of the timeline created a chilling image of someone preparing quietly while everyone else slept. Despite this, Liora held on to the belief that her parents would protect her. She kept glancing at them, expecting their expressions to soften. She reassured herself silently that once they spoke, the judge and jury would understand her differently. But she did not realize how deeply the event had transformed them. The emotional gap between them was no longer caused by distance or misunderstanding. It was shaped by fear and betrayal. They were not waiting to defend her. They were waiting to tell the truth. As the prosecution prepared to call its next witness, the air shifted. The judge announced it was time for the victims to speak. Liora straightened her posture, believing the moment she had been waiting for had finally arrived. She smiled, unaware that everything she trusted was seconds away from collapsing.
Marta Mendez rose slowly from her seat, each step toward the front of the courtroom measured and unsteady. She still carried the physical reminders of that night, bruising along her shoulder, stiffness in her movements, and a faint tremor in her hands that hadn't faded since the attack. Liora watched her with a hopeful expression, interpreting her mother's hesitation as emotional pain over seeing her daughter in court. She didn't understand that Marta's trembling was not from sadness, but from reliving the terror she had endured. When Marta began to speak, the room fell completely silent. She described waking to a sudden, sharp pain and realizing she couldn't move easily. She felt a weight pressing on her chest and saw shadows moving in the dim light. At first, her mind had tried to explain the moment as a nightmare, but when she felt another blow, the truth became horrifyingly clear. She had been attacked while asleep, and the one responsible was not a stranger. It was the daughter she once held as a newborn. Liora's face changed instantly. Her smile slipped, her lips tightening into a straight line. She blinked rapidly, almost as if trying to process a reality she hadn't expected. Marta spoke with a fragile but unwavering voice, explaining the depth of fear she had never imagined her child could provoke. She recalled the desperate moments as she tried to move, the confusion of seeing Liora's silhouette, and the crushing realization that her daughter wasn't acting out of panic. She was acting with intention. In the back of the courtroom, some jurors shifted in their seats, visibly shaken by the emotional weight of the testimony. The judge maintained a neutral expression, but his gaze remained fixed on Marta as she described every detail without dramatization. She didn't embellish, she didn't exaggerate, and she didn't soften her account. Her words came from a place of truth carved by trauma. Then Rey Mendez stood, moving more slowly than his wife. The injury to his neck had left a thin line of scar tissue visible above his collar. His left arm remained stiff, only partially responsive after surgery. Liora turned toward him with renewed hope, believing he might defend her even if her mother could not. She held her breath as he approached the front. But Rey's voice carried no hesitation. He described the moment he tried to intervene, only to be struck with force that blurred his vision and knocked him to the floor. He spoke about watching his daughter move toward him with a cold, distant expression he had never seen before. He explained how he fought to stay conscious, terrified that losing awareness would mean losing his life. Every word dismantled the image Liora had created for herself, the image of a misunderstood girl who had simply broken under pressure. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as Rey described the aftermath, waking up in the hospital, unable to speak at first, and learning from doctors that he had barely survived. He expressed guilt for not noticing the changes in Liora sooner, but he also expressed fear, real, ongoing fear of what she was capable of. Liora's breathing grew shallow, her hands gripping the edges of the table. It was the first time she appeared genuinely afraid. She believed she controlled how others saw her, but her parents' voices wiped away every layer of her carefully constructed narrative. After the parents finished, the prosecutor revealed another unsettling discovery, a hidden folder of voice memos Liora recorded in the weeks leading up to the attack. The memos showed her practicing explanations she planned to give afterwards, rehearsing emotions and adjusting her story.
These recordings revealed a disturbing level of preparation, void of panic or confusion. As the audio played softly in the courtroom, Liora lowered her gaze. Her earlier confidence evaporated completely. The jurors no longer saw her as a troubled teen. They saw someone capable of chilling calculation. By the time the evidence presentation ended, the tone of the entire trial had shifted. Liora was no longer the quiet girl misunderstood by the world. She had become, in the eyes of the court, the architect of her own destruction.
The fourth chapter plunges deeper into the investigation, and by the time the prosecution resumes their presentation, the atmosphere inside the courtroom has transformed. The emotional blow of Marta and Rey's testimonies lingers in every corner of the room, but the prosecution is not finished. They transition from emotional impact to hard digital evidence, an approach that leaves no space for doubt or interpretation. A lead detective introduces the next sequence of findings, a secondary account Liora created under the alias Nox Lumen. The username appears on various platforms, discussion forums, obscure group chats, and a private messaging channel where users shared disturbing fantasies about escaping responsibility, rejecting authority, and reshaping their lives by any means necessary. It becomes clear that Liora didn't just stumble into this corner of the internet. She sought it out, participated actively, and absorbed the validation offered by strangers who thrived on shock value and destructive ideas. The prosecution projects screenshots from the account, each one timestamped to specific nights when her parents were asleep. The posts reveal a growing fascination with control and an obsession with the concept of wiping the slate clean. She uploaded images of her own home, including hallways, doorways, and corners where shadows pooled at night. For investigators, these were not artistic snapshots. They were reconnaissance photos. When asked to elaborate, a digital forensic analyst explains how Liora labeled each photo with terms like risk, blind spot, entry, and timing. The courtroom listens quietly, absorbing the disturbing precision behind the labels. These weren't spontaneous uploads, but part of a structured plan. Every digital footprint reinforced the idea that Liora had been preparing far earlier than anyone believed. Next, her journal entries are revisited, not for emotional content, but for technical detail. A behavioral specialist takes the stand to analyze the handwriting, patterns, and phrasing. They point out how Liora shifted between emotional venting and cold, structured planning. One page features a list of perceived restrictions her parents placed on her. The next page outlines ways to remove those restrictions permanently. The specialist emphasizes how the juxtaposition demonstrates a mind wrestling with resentment that had transformed into something far more dangerous. Liora sits motionless as her private world is dissected. Her earlier calm is gone, replaced by a vacant expression. She stares forward, blinking slowly, as if each new piece of evidence pushes her deeper into a reality she didn't expect to face. She had convinced herself that her intentions were misunderstood, but now the courtroom is seeing the truth laid bare in her own handwriting and digital traces. Then comes another discovery, a series of late-night videos recorded on her phone. The footage is shaky, dark, and difficult to watch, not because of graphic content, but because of the unsettling quietness within them. Liora walks through the house while her parents sleep, moving slowly, testing the creak of floorboards, pausing at bedroom doors. These recordings are time-stamped within the same weeks her journal entries grew darker and her online posts intensified. Investigators explained that these were not random recordings. They were rehearsals. They were her way of simulating scenarios she had written about and posted online. The weight of that revelation settles heavily over the jury. The prosecution then shifts to the aftermath of the attack. Photos of the injuries, medical reports, and reconstructive diagrams are shown. They demonstrate the severity of the wounds Marta and Rey sustained, emphasizing that survival was a matter of staggeringly slim odds. Had emergency responders arrived minutes later, the case would have been a double homicide. The defense tries to argue that Liora's mental state was fragile, that she acted under emotional distress amplified by outside influence. But the prosecution counters with the digital timeline, which tells a different story, one of steady, patient preparation. The courtroom's view of Liora is now fully transformed. She is no longer a misunderstood teenager, but someone who built a private universe where she held total control, rehearsed scenarios, experimented with possibilities, and ultimately acted on them. By the time closing arguments approach, the narrative is no longer blurred by speculation. The prosecution's case has become a mosaic of hard facts, and the pieces fit together with frightening clarity. The jury has been shown not just what happened, but the unsettling truth of how deliberately it was planned. The jury deliberated with surprising speed. Their discussions lasted just under 3 hours, a short window that revealed how clearly the evidence had spoken for itself. When the bailiff announced their return, the courtroom filled with a tense stillness. Liora kept her hands folded neatly, trying to mimic the calmness she'd shown on the first day of the trial. But her breathing betrayed her, shallow, uneven, and quick, as if she sensed the verdict before it was spoken. When the foreperson rose and delivered the decision, the words landed like stones. Guilty on every charge: attempted murder, aggravated assault, and premeditation. Each count reinforced the same truth. The court believed she had acted with intention. Liora stared forward, unblinking, as though her mind refused to accept the outcome. The judge read the sentence carefully, outlining the years she would spend in detention before transitioning to adult custody. It was a number heavy enough to define the rest of her life. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Reporters scribbled notes, attorneys exchanged stern glances, and spectators whispered about the severity of the punishment. Liora looked toward the section where her parents sat, searching desperately for a sign, any sign that they still cared for her. But Marta and Rey didn't lift their eyes. They sat side by side, hands clasped tightly, their faces marked by grief far too deep to disguise. That absence of connection pierced Liora more sharply than the sentence itself. She realized in that moment that her final hope had dissolved. The illusion she clung to throughout the trial, the belief that her parents would rescue her from consequences, vanished completely. Their silence delivered a message she could no longer ignore. Whatever bond once existed had been severed the night she attacked them. As deputies approached, Liora's composure fractured. Her lip trembled, and her legs felt weak as she stood. She tried to maintain control, but her eyes filled with a fear she had never shown before. For the first time, she understood she didn't command her future. She didn't command anything at all. The door that would close behind her now symbolized the end of every freedom she once took for granted. Outside the courthouse, news coverage ignited instantly. The story of a teen who targeted her own parents spread across local stations, eventually reaching regional outlets. Commentators analyzed every detail: the digital evidence, the disturbing planning, the emotional collapse in court. Communities debated the influence of online spaces, the pressures facing modern teens, and the signs families might miss until it's too late. Inside the correctional facility, Liora's world shrank to a concrete room and a strict routine. The adrenaline that once fueled her fantasies evaporated, leaving behind a hollow quiet she had never anticipated. She spent long stretches staring at the ceiling, replaying moments of the trial, her mother trembling as she spoke, her father describing the terror in his voice, the jurors watching her as they made their decision. She became known among the staff for her silence. She rarely engaged in programs, rarely asked questions, and rarely ate full meals. Counselors attempted to reach her, encouraging her to talk about her emotions, but Liora resisted. She had built her world in secrecy, and now secrecy was the only comfort she understood. Even that comfort felt thinner every day. Meanwhile, Marta and Rey continued their slow recovery. Physical therapy consumed much of their time, but the emotional healing was far more challenging. They moved to a new home, hoping distance would ease the memories embedded in the old one. They rarely discussed the trial, speaking instead about small routines, appointments, and ways to rebuild stability. They carried both guilt and relief. Guilt for missing the signs, relief for surviving. Jasper Redd, whose early influence had shaped some of Liora's thinking, vanished completely from the digital landscape. Investigators attempted to contact him multiple times, but he had erased his online presence, deleted accounts, and disappeared without forwarding information. His role remained a dark shadow, never fully provable, but undeniably present. In the end, the image of Liora smiling on the first day of court became the symbol of the entire case. A teenager unaware of what was coming, unaware of the gravity of her actions, unaware of how deeply she had misread the people she believed she could manipulate. She walked into the courtroom expecting support. She left it understanding betrayal from the opposite side. Her own betrayal of the people who loved her became the truth that defined her fate.